Okay, so this is the first video that introduces the soldering that you'll need to do for Lab 2. If you look here at the functioning PCB, you'll see that there's an LED that's flashing around in a circle, and it'll switch directions here in a second. With each of the LEDs is a resistor. The resistor is obviously there to limit the current. And each of the resistor LED series combinations is being driven by a pin from the MSP430, which is here in the center of the PCB. This capacitor is in place between the power and ground lines of the MSP430. You'll see on this PCB that there are lighter colored spots and darker colored spots. So the darker colored spots are just a blue plastic coating on fiberglass. The lighter colored spots are that same blue plastic coating on top of copper traces. So this is in general how a PCB is made. It's copper on top of fiberglass. That copper is patterned to give us the circuit that we want. So these large copper spaces here and here and so on are ground planes. So they're there to make the default copper on the board be ground, the ground signal. And so what you'll see is that the capacitor here is going between the power line that's coming from the battery pins, which are batteries on the back of the PCB. Here's where it comes up onto the front side, and the ground plane. Okay, so what are the other parts? So this resistor right here is 47 kilo ohm resistor for some. That's the value that's specified by TI as a pull-up resistor for the reset line, and that's there. It's necessary in order for programming. Here's a button, and then here's an RC network that's there to make sure that, despite the fact that these buttons are very crappy, that the very rapid bouncing of the switch when you push it or when you depress it or release it don't get transmitted into the signal line of the MSP430. If you look very closely, you can see a small dot right there. That dot marks the first pin on the MSP430. And so what you'll want to do is you'll want to make sure that that lines up with the dot that's on the PCB here. So see, there's right there is the dot that the dot on the MSP430 should line up with. Now let me quickly show you the back side of this. So the relevant part that you should see, so here's the battery clip with the battery in place, and then here is a little header that has, it's a 4-pin 0.1 inch header that's there for programming. I like this because you could either put it on the top or on the bottom. I like it on the bottom because it makes everything look better on the top. Okay, so here we are again. Let's start going again. When you're setting this up, the most difficult thing to solder on this PCB is going to be the MSP430. So this 20-pin surface mount package. So what I suggest is that you create what I call an MVP, so a minimally viable printed circuit board. So here is an example minimally viable circuit board. So this just has the MSP430 soldered in place, the pull-up resistor on the reset line, and the programming interface. So my suggestion is that you build a small cable for programming. So here's my small cable. On one end it has the proper header to plug into the programming interface. And on the other end, it has a smaller header that can plug into your launch pad. So your launch pad has two locations that are good for programming. One are these pins here. Keep in mind that there's something weird here where if you are programming, then one of these VCC lines, so this is the test and reset connection, or rather test and reset. I think that, who knows what the order is right. This is VCC, but actually this one is VCC and this one is connected to this side. And then ground is not here on this header. So if you are going to use this connection for programming, then you'll need to connect to this pin, this pin, this pin, and this pin. This is the ground pin. But I actually like to connect to this little programming interface here on the side. It's 6 pins, but actually only 4 of them are necessary for programming. It's the middle 4. And the order is the same ground, reset, test, VCC. So you can see here I put a little connector, a header connector on this end, and then my cable can plug into that. Okay, so you build your small MVP board and then make sure that you can write a program to it. So you plug it up to your MSP430, your Launchpad, and allow it to program. And so once that works, then you can add all of the other discrete components like all of the LEDs. So the only other thing that's tricky is putting the LEDs in the right orientation. So in order to show you this, I'm going to turn off the flashing. So what you'll see is that even from far away, the LEDs look pretty symmetric, but they're not actually symmetric. On one end, there's a green line, and that green line corresponds to the side that a diode has a line on. So at this magnification, it's a little bit difficult to see. I'll see if I can't get a better view. So here we've zoomed in to one of these LEDs, and what you can see is that there on that end of the LED, this end right here is a small green line on this end, and it's not on that end. And so that's how you know which end of your LED is supposed to go on the ground side. So the direction that current flows is it flows from this side to this side. All right, so next what we're going to do is we're going to get set up so I can show you how I solder the MSP430s. First, let's take a look at the way that I'm set up. So I've got the PCB clamped here in place underneath the microscope. So if we come down and look through these microscope objectives, you can see that in focus is right here at the very center of this PCB where the MSP430 is going to go. I've got my solder, and I've got my solder flux, and then also copper wick here ready to go. Here's my soldering iron. It's got a nice small tip, and I'll turn on my soldering iron here in the back, and then in a minute it'll heat up. So the target temperature is 680 degrees Fahrenheit, which it'll be there in a second. This is a hot air gun. This is very useful if you want to remove an MSP430 because it's not functional because you've done something like overheat it while you're soldering it. Lastly, this is the fume extractor. This is nice for getting rid of the solder fumes as you're soldering. We'll bring it up nice and close so that it's sucking everything back and that I'm not breathing it in. As I said, the very first thing that we'll do is just solder the MSP430 on, so I'll get set up so that you can see that.